The Métis are a distinct Indigenous people. Métis communities in Ontario emerged along waterways and fur trade routes before Canada was a country. These historic Métis communities, which persist to the present day, develop their own customs, traditions, and identities that are rooted in kinship, relationship to the land, and a distinctive culture and way of life.
The origins of the Métis community in Killarney go back long before they moved permanently to Killarney. This is part of a Great Lakes Métis community for which we have evidence going back at least to close to the beginning of the 18th century.
In the early 19th century, control of the regional fur trade was contested by numerous companies. In 1821, two of the industry's leaders, the Hudson Bay Company and Northwest Company, merged. Their need for manpower was reduced. Unemployed traders had the option of leaving the region or continuing independently. Some stayed and developed an independent fur trade at Killarney.
It is more likely that the people who stayed were the ones who had married women from the North Shore area and had extended family networks there already.
One of these individuals was Étienne de la Morandière. He had served in the British Army during the War of 1812 and worked in the fur trade in the years that followed. And like several other Métis families and individuals, he had a small area of land under cultivation. He raised Indian corn, potatoes, carrots, and hay, kept animals, and produced several hundred pounds of maple sugar. Most of these families also trapped small quantities of fur.
Étienne married an Ottawa woman from Mackinac named Josette Sese-Gonokwe. They did have a large family, and we know that he brought that family to Killarney.
By the 1830s, visitors to Killarney began to note the existence of a lively Métis community on the north shore of Lake Huron. This was evidenced by shared characteristics, including Roman Catholicism, harvesting activities like fishing and maple sugaring, and the languages of French, Métis, possibly Ojibwe, and English. Étienne's home is noted as a Métis gathering place at this time.
We have an account from a steamship captain who stopped at de la Morandiere's house in 1836, who comments on the large group of assembled Indians and Canadians, that's his term, and then the fine welcome that they received, including being able to dance the night away to the lively music of the half-breeds.
Shortly after, in 1838, the Killarney Métis community made a collective petition to a visiting priest requesting a treaty comparable to the 1836 Bondhead Treaty that had been signed by nearby First Nations.
The half-breeds asked him collectively for a number of things, one of which was to have a clergyman sent, to have a church built for their use, and also to have a treaty signed with them, as had been signed with the Ottawa and Ojibwe on Manitoulin Island in 1836, to guarantee them an area of land and some fishing rights.
Unfortunately, the petition of the Killarney Métis community would go unheard. In the late 1840s, resource exploitation along the north shores of Lakes Superior and Huron began to increase. As a result, Europeans increasingly encroached on Indigenous lands.
In 1850, William Benjamin Robinson was sent to the north shore of Lake Huron to negotiate a treaty with the Indigenous peoples there. When the treaty was negotiated, he told the Ojibwe chiefs that he was only sent to negotiate with the Indians and not with the half-breed relatives that they wished to have included.
The government would not negotiate with the Métis as a collective. Métis had to choose to be white or Indian, but they were neither.
So in the 1871 census, the people that we can identify as being Métis families were in the majority in Killarney, but by 1881 this is beginning to change. More people are moving in from outside, from Ontario or from the British Isles. The old Métis families are still there, but they are beginning to be outnumbered by people moving in from other locations to start lumbering operations or commercial fisheries.
This demographic shift brought new economic and social challenges to a community which had been established for over 50 years.
In the 1880s, when these new neighbors moved into the vicinity of Killarney, they encountered a Métis community, some of the members of whom were well educated, quite prosperous with their own independent businesses, and who held coveted government positions of authority over their non-Indigenous neighbors, such as lighthouse keepers and fishery overseers.
These positions offered numerous benefits, such as a reliable government salary and the ability to enforce regulations on newly arriving commercial fishermen.
We do know from a very interesting series of documents that has been left to us that some of the new neighbors resented this authority and challenged it.
Challenges to the established Métis community came in many forms. Andrew Peters launched a formal complaint against Pierre Régis de la Morandière, a descendant of Étienne de la Morandière, and a lighthouse keeper. Andrew claimed that Pierre, a half-breed, was collecting Indian pay and therefore should be classified as Indian, making him ineligible for government office. De la Morandière's family was never looked upon as Indians. It is only since I got the situation of lightkeeper that my enemies got into their heads that I am an Indian and wish to disqualify me from holding an office under the government. It is true that I have some Indian blood, and I am not ashamed of it. But nevertheless, I think the government makes no distinction as regards to the nationality so long as a person is honest, able, and trustworthy. The harassment that Pierre, known as PR, and his family experienced also took a much darker form.
These new neighbors used on PR some tactics that they had brought with them from the British Isles, such as the mutilation of some of his animals and the theft of the underwear of his wife and children to run up on a flagpole outside their house. Evidently, the new neighbors resented his reporting their illegal fishing and chose this type of revenge to express their dissatisfaction.
Despite this, PR did not stand alone. While many European newcomers supported this continual, systematic harassment, the pre-existing Killarney Métis community defied their abusers.
It appears from PR's own accounts of these episodes that other members of the Métis community at Killarney were warning him about the activities of some of his non-Indigenous neighbors and some of the revenge that they wanted to take against him for continuing in his efforts to enforce the fisheries regulations.
As the 19th century ended, so did the importance of the Killarney region in the national economy. At this time, the HBC reported that the district is now of very little importance, being altogether out of the way of trade. The Indians hunt very little fur, now that the country is getting settled along the Spanish River, and the railway passes miles to the back of the post. A profitable business cannot be carried on at the post much longer. After 1891, the village of Killarney still composed largely of old Killarney families, such as Prou, Solomon, La Morandière, Roch, Pelon, and Tranche. However, racism forced many to hide their Métis identity. Despite this, the historic Métis community in Killarney persisted, and the rich history is once again being shared.